Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. I've seen the sun hang like a flame in the sky. Yes, I've seen the sun turn, and I've seen the sun die. And I often think now, before our time is run, will there be any thoughts for what we have done? Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call
Hello and welcome, excuse me, to another SDAQ&A. And if you're in this part of the world, Happy New Year. And if you're in Europe or the UK, you're just about to wake up to the new year. And of course, all of my friends over there in the US of A and that kind of part of the world, it is New Year's Eve. So Happy New Year's Eve to you guys. What a year it has been, and what a great year I am looking forward to. So welcome everybody. Good to see you here in the chat as well. Please feel free to engage today and get involved with the conversation. Now, I've called today's program I should have gotten a glass of water. Intentionally defending Dr. Ford since 2011. Now, I have, of course, been a fan of Des Ford, since as far back as I can remember. So I'm not really drawing a line in the sand under that date of 2011, but I am aware that I more intentionally began to focus on supporting the right for Des Ford to have a voice. If you're a Seventh-day Adventist and know anything about Des Ford, you will know that in 1980 there was the famous Glacier View gathering, and which essentially led to the defrocking of Des Ford. And I intentionally, since 2011, have been ensuring that whatever I can do to make sure his voice, his thoughts, his teachings have not been suppressed. I've been trying to do my best in my little way to get that message out there. And I've also been trying to ensure that people find out actually what did go on at Glacier View. In my humble opinion, it was a kangaroo court. The decision had already been made, and Des Ford had to go. And many of you have seen my programs, the setting the record straight, the lie at the center of Glacier View in a nutshell. There's a few programs I've done there where I outline that the lie after Glacier View was told. A lie was told that the majority of the scholars and academics and people that gathered there, over 120 people, I think, didn't see light in what Des was saying. And the reality is that the majority did see light. There was a 2-part consensus document voted on. Even Des himself said, yeah, I can go along with that. And of course, if you've even watched one of my programs focusing on Des Ford, you will have heard me mention that a 10-point statement was wheeled out in the afternoon on the Friday, the last day. A lot of people had left. It wasn't voted on. Des and Gillian were cornered. And some of the points Des was told were just being raised. Some of the points on this statement were just being raised to really drill down and see where he may have truly, found some disagreement with the church. And it was on that, his unwillingness to go along and accept some of the things that they wanted him to do, based on those 10 points, that he was eventually sacked. So that's a whole other story. But that just gives you a little bit of background, particularly if you're just joining and you not really haven't had much history about the Des Ford scenario. So just backing up a little bit, I'm saying that intentionally, since 2011, I have been supporting the right for the Des Ford teachings to be heard. The freedom of speech kind of thing runs strong in my veins. But to back up a little bit, of course, I was pretty young in 1980 Glacier View, and possibly a teenager still, not fully aware of what was going on. But I soon realized in the early 80s, that something was going on. And something happened. A friend of mine who was a pastor, sometime now in the 84, maybe 83, I'm not too sure, showed me a fax that had been sent out here in Australia. Now, I can't remember if that was sent out in just the Sydney Greater Conference, or if it was Australia-wide or SPD division-wide, the unions. I'm not too sure. But I read the fax, saw it. I have even got a copy somewhere that I kept of it. Some of you younger ones won't even know what a fax is. Anyway, on this particular fax, it said a very interesting thing. It said, do not invite, because it was sent to the pastors, do not invite Dr. Des Ford or George Burnside to speak at your church's events and functions. Words to that effect. Now, those that know George Burnside, he was more a traditional Adventist, teaching the original Adventist message. And Des, of course, was teaching this, what was called new theology. And I remember as a young man thinking, wait a second, the church leaders, to ensure maybe a lessening of controversy or pushback on them, were cutting the platform of the very excuse me, conservative traditional Adventist voice and the new theology. That surprised me, because at that particular time in the early 80s, it was known that Des Ford was being suppressed, annexed, shut down. It was known. It was known that if you were a young pastor or someone seeking employment, you were almost guaranteed to be asked questions that would reveal whether you were a Des Ford supporter or not. And you wouldn't be employed if you came across as a Des Ford supporter. So we all knew that the Des Ford message was being shut down, but we didn't realize that also what we called the concerned brethren, the CBs, they were being shut down as well. And I've got a lot of material and resources here of letters being sent to the South Pacific Division office by members of the Concerned Brethren group. George Burnside was one of these unofficial members, and they're very upset that they are being shut down. So I'm just taking you back from 2011 back to the early 80s, when I became aware that the church leadership, whenever there's controversy, they do two things. They try and suppress and shut down all those who have a controversial voice on all sides, and then they wheel out wonderful Adventist apologists. And I remember at Avondale, back then Avondale College, I just remember I started there in 81, post Glacier View and into those early years of the 80s, I just remember a different kind of preacher coming to the college, because it's kind of a standout Adventist institution. And I just noticed that week after week and every quarter, people, very well-known evangelists and leaders from the USA and from our division, and they would just speak in glowing terms of the church and Ellen White. And I just noticed this extra effort to give us a scripted, glossy view of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, while behind the scenes, they were just snipping off any controversial person. And as I said, I was shocked that they were also trying to censor the message of George Burnside, who in this part of the world, the South Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia, he, in his day, through the 50s and 60s, was an incredibly much loved evangelist. And Des Ford, also incredibly much loved teacher, evangelist as well, very powerful speaker. So what ignited in me back then? So I'm saying here, intentionally defending Dr. Ford since 2011. I'm going to come to that little interesting date in a minute, but I'm just trying to give you some background that I have been aware of the message of Burnside and the message of Ford, and I'm not totally focused on whether I like or dislike the message. That's to me a secondary thing. I did not like, at a young age, back in the early 80s, I did not like this idea of the administration shutting people down. And that's kind of what ignites a lot of what I do. I left the church. I did not like how women were being shut down. I've gotten a lot of flack over my support of something that just seems quite simply an unethical actioning, whatever the right word would be, to suppress women based on gender. And people say, oh, well, look, they can still be pastors and they might be not ordained, but ordination doesn't matter. Well, it does matter when it's used as a weapon of suppression. And so women, people say, but they can be commissioned. Yeah, but there are many jobs in the church that women cannot get unless they are ordained. So I don't want to go down that path, but I'm trying to highlight that for me, I am ignited to defend people when their voices are being shut down, especially by pompous, holier than thou, pious, we are on a higher moral ground leadership group. So even as a young person, that's what was firing me up a lot and permeated everything that I did in my music ministry. Stirring the pot, not to be a stirrer, but to keep people honest and to allow people's voice to be heard. And you've also heard me tell that in the 90s, I actually spent thousands of dollars. A friend of mine, myself, and an audio engineer specialist in restoring George Burnside recordings that were on a reel-to-reel. Took hours and hours and hours to restore these 22 hour and a half long messages that he did in 1959 at the Tivoli Theatre in Christchurch. He spoke for 22 nights in a row, and there were over 1,000 people each night. So I don't. So just for the record, I don't agree with the theology of George Burnside. I don't agree with that original Adventist theology. But I agree that he should still be heard. So I put a lot of time and effort into making sure that his material was out there. And, we certainly made sure pre-social media that everybody heard about these. We converted them into cassette tapes. So that's just a bit of background. Let's go back even further before I come to this date, 2011. As a child growing up on campus here at Avondale, now Avondale University, one of my favorite places in the world, still. My father was a lecturer at Avondale, and at the same time as Des Ford. So as a child, I was aware of Des Ford also. So I'm giving you this background so that I'm not saying, oh, I only came awake in 2011 about some things. I have been aware of the very positive influence of Dr. Des Ford since childhood, since I was 6 or 7, 8 or 9, under 10 anyway, and have always found him to be an absolute gem of a human, a man filled with integrity, passion, humor, and the very special ability to articulate messages and teachings in a way that was so crystallized in how he shared them that you grasped what he was saying very clearly, and I liked what I heard as I grew up, and occasionally encountered hearing him speak, and eventually actually meeting him, and him coming and doing a program down here, I think in 2016. Gillian might be able to give me the date there in the comments. And then eventually doing one interview that divided into 3 parts on SDAQ&A season 1, the very first 3 interviews. So there's a fairly brief but involved background of my connection to Des Ford. The greatest thing that I believe he infused and brought into the Seventh-day Adventist Church was this sense of assurance of salvation. He took away the legalistic framework in my mind when I was young, and replaced it with a sense of peace and assurance, and that God was gracious, and I really value that. And I guess I'm highlighting that it's pretty clear that when I was a Seventh-day Adventist, I would have been heralding the Des Ford message and the Des Ford right to be heard and not silenced. And it was clear that I didn't support the original SDA theology, a lot of those doctrines, and it was pretty clear that I didn't support the political maneuverings of scripted, well-manicured Adventist apologist support. And here and on SDA Q&A, though, I will hear and happily ask questions of all the different groups. But running through all that I do more profoundly than whether I agree with someone's theology or not is my desire to allow people to have the freedom to speak. And so so we're going to talk about 2011 here, where I intentionally began defending Dr. Ford on Facebook, and I was going to try and bring it up on the screen share, but it is not working, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to read from my phone. I apologize for that, because it is nice to be able to see things up on the screen, and maybe at a later date I can return to this. But here's the thing. Social media comes along, and I was an early adopter to Facebook. I think, I don't know, was the first year 2007 or 8? I was on board within months. Didn't really understand what it was or what was going on, but I noticed over the first couple of years that this social media thing was changing the world. And boy, it has, for good and bad. But I noticed that it afforded an opportunity to people like me, a way to speak your mind and not be shut down, a platform to share your ideas and not be shut down. and it got me thinking. And and the reason I'm doing today's program is because this popped up in a Facebook memory on November 29, so only a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago. So November 29, 2011, being aware that I could say things that people wouldn't shut down, I wrote on my actual Facebook wall, not into a private group, onto my big, not big, but I mean the main platform that I was sharing, who am I on and what my family is up to and whatnot. I wrote this, and it was the reaction to this that led to this, my intentional defense of Dr. Ford. I'm going to come to the comments and chat that are happening here soon. I'm not reading them at all at the moment. I can't even see them. So I will come to those in a minute. But I wanted to read the post and some of the comments and how that led me and why it led me to begin intentionally defending Dr. Ford. Not so much his theology. That's important but secondary. I wanted to defend his right to be heard, and I wanted to find out what had actually happened. And I wanted to get to the ground zero of how he had been mistreated. Because mistreated he was. He and Gillian were incredibly mistreated, but always gracious of Adventism, the people in the church, very gracious. And more gracious than me. But I wanted to find out, and I feel like I have. And many of you have been on that journey with me. So here's what I wrote. Some people are saying that Dr. Desmond Ford should have his ministerial credentials reinstated. And I put in brackets within the SDA Church. Is this even possible? If you were an SDA, what do you think and why? And were you affected by the Ford debate of the early 80s? Or was it a storm in a teacup? Or a crucial turning point for the SDA Church? Anyway, just interested in your, and I added for some reason, calm, collected thoughts. So I was interested in people's thoughts, but I also realized that it was a controversial topic. What I didn't realize was the response it got. Now, back in those days, in the early days of Facebook, it had over 250 main comments, and back then that was a lot. That was kind of equivalent to, like, I think about 800 these days. Back then in 2011, that was considered a big response, and it surprised me. And it was the response to that comment that made me realize it was possible to both research Glacier View, Des Ford, and give his voice, in my small way, a little boost, being heard. And I realized that no one could stop me doing that. And I realized that so many people had so many different views on it. And I realized, yes, that there are so many different types of Adventists. But I eventually realized that there is a special message within Adventism. The original Adventists teach a very special and unique message that is bound up in Ellen White's confirmation that something happened in 1844. Jesus didn't return, but a new kind of judgment began, and that the Lord would return soon, and that the Adventists were a commandment-keeping people. They were getting ready for Jesus' soon return, and they had the spirit of prophecy. And they were on the planet to vindicate God and prove Satan's claim that you cannot keep the commandments wrong. And they said Jesus did it, and so can we. Now, of course, there's many Adventists who don't agree with that. But in all my research and hours of reading and interviews, that's the kernel of Adventism's unique original teaching. And of course, you might be an Adventist that doesn't believe that. But imagine this. If Ellen White is someone that you respect and believe in, and that original message was true, just imagine that that was true, those of you that have questioned it. Whoa, that's got to be the most important message ever given to the earth. Why would you water it down? Why would you try and somehow keep it, not keep it? And that, as some of you have seen, has caused a little bit of frustration from me, but no judgment, because I was in the Adventist church for 54 years, doing the same thing. I was trying to make the Des Ford message blossom and grow and expand within the Adventist church, and maybe even help in a small way, along with many others, liberal progressive friends, revisionists, to bring about a positive theological change. So in 2011, after I wrote this post, I'm going to read some comments, I realized the wonderful opportunity I now had with social media to explore, research, discover not just the topic of Des Ford, but so many things. And in spite of all the challenges, troubles, pushback, positive, negative that social media brings to the table, it has been a very meaningful and rewarding journey. And yeah, I've made mistakes. I've been a normal, real, flawed human individual. But this moment, November 29, 2011, was the moment that something ignited within me that grew and grew and grew. And what are we, 13 years later? Is that right? I have really got a whole new thing in life. And I love it. I'm so grateful for it, to be sharing with you guys 3 times a week, exploring Adventism. And people say, why don't you let the whole Des Ford thing go, or this kind of thing? Well, maybe I would if the church actually addressed the problems. And here's the thing, even the liberal progressive gospel Adventists, who I've sometimes also called out, instead of saying, hey, yeah, maybe we could have done this or could have done that or could do this or could do that, turn to the same kind of ad hominem attacks that Des was getting. Oh, Pete, you're just trashing the church. You're just bagging the church. No, look, let's put all that aside. Let's talk about what are the claims that I'm making. Refute those. Let's talk about these things. Let's dialogue them. Stop trying to just shut people down because you don't agree with them, or because you can't answer their claims. So anyway, here we go. So in response to my question about the possibility of getting Des Ford reinstated, this is what people were writing. And I'm not asking that question now. I am not asking, should he be posthumously reinstated? That's a whole other topic. That is not my point. My point today is this. Where is it? That little date there was the beginning of me beginning a whole new journey. And I hope that a lot of people have found the dialogue and the discussions worthwhile. So I'm going to name people because it's all public, and some of you might be watching. And nothing's organized. I'm just reading out comments. So this is Kerry Lee Lawrence. Des Ford brought my dad and his family into faith in the church. I do not know anything much about Des Ford. However, I see a church with low tolerance for anyone different to their old staunch ways. And because I love Jesus, I'll try to stay. Steve Walkham wrote, has anything changed in the church since the Des Ford era? And can anyone provide a brief explanation as to what the whole saga was? And Stephen, I know, watches the show, and hopefully, in answer to that question 13 years ago, we have given an explanation to the saga. Just go and see season 2. Even if you watched one episode, the season 2, episode 1 with Bill Johnson, that would really help with awareness. This man's name creates a lot of negative, judgmental reactions from people. And yet, when prompted, they don't know what he did that was so bad. Boy, that's a really good one there. He was demonized, and he was demonized with similar tactics that even the liberal progressives use against people they don't like. So I don't think anyone can say, hey, I don't deserve the finger pointed at me. We all react in ways that are, we feel attacked, and so we just attack. We seem to struggle as humans to go, okay, this is what you're saying, let me refute that. But Des was demonized. People around Kurumbong were literally saying he's devil possessed. Can you imagine that? Devil possessed. And then, as Steve said, when pushed, well, what did he say you disagree with? Oh, I don't know, not real sure. Nerily Smith Dobson wrote, I've heard worse things preached from the pulpit. I think he was singled out as a scapegoat because of fear of things changing or divergent thought. Kes D wrote, he and the mainstream SDAs debated the investigative judgment at great, ultimately divisive lengths. Interestingly, you can read more here. And she's put a link that's no longer... Oh, and she wrote in brackets, Wikipedia. And Shelley Poole wrote, the Des Ford shenanigans was before my time. I've tried again and again to understand what went on, but from where I stand, it looks like people took sides with a great deal of lead in their feet over something that should never have been such a huge issue. And again, and it's funny, like it's 13 years ago that Shelley wrote that. And I hope that in the last few years of doing a lot of these shows, that again, some of these questions have been addressed. And I think personally that when you do look at it, people had lead in their feet over something that should never have been such a big issue. I think it actually is a big issue, because it is a theological issue that if you side with the Des Ford theology, you're essentially fostering, encouraging, going along with a new kind of Adventist theology that is not just different, is absolutely the opposite of the original Adventist view. And so, a lot of people think, well, what's the IJ? What's the investigative judgment? Does it matter? The judgment's in the Bible. If you're trying to define Adventism as having something unique to offer the world, if you do away with that teaching that Ellen endorsed, having had a vision from God, if you do away with that unique message, you're taking away from any claim that the Adventist Church has a unique special message for the end times. That's why it is a big issue. And Des Ford essentially was saying that Ellen White, though he loved her, it was inspired by her, to his dying day would speak highly of her. He questioned her authority on this doctrine, the investigative judgment, the sanctuary doctrine. And by questioning that, he was questioning the unique claim that Adventists make. So it is an important, not just a judgment perspective or a few little things wrong here and there. If you're lowering the authority of Ellen G. White, and you say this teaching cannot be supported by the Bible, which Des Ford did so brilliantly, he proved that. But if that's the case, you're doing away with the only unique teaching of the Adventist Church, its reason for being in the first place. So, I'd love to hear some thoughts on that, because I think it is a very important difference. And I'm so glad that the liberal, progressive, revisionists, gospel Adventists have revised that original Adventist teaching. I think that's great. And I think good on you for staying in the church and wanting to revise it and bring about changes. But I think it's also important to note that the theology that does away with the investigative judgment, the sanctuary doctrine, 1844, that does away with that, essentially is doing away with the original traditional Adventist teaching and view, which is we're a special people. We have the spirit of prophecy. We have a unique message for the world at these last days. If you're doing away with that, doesn't Adventism just become a normal Protestant movement? And so I can see why the George Burnsides, the Concerned Brethren, the more fundamentalist Adventists, I can see why they feel threatened. And the revisionist says, oh, we'll accept you. Come into our big tent. Yeah, well, they don't really want you saying that. They don't want to be in your big tent. They want you out of their tent. Because the liberal, progressive, revisionist, gospel Adventist, who many were inspired by the teachings of Des Ford, have are doing away with their key doctrine. Of course, they're upset. Of course, they're fighting back. I side with their right to be upset with you liberal, progressive, revisionist gospel Adventists. They want you gone because you are totally tweaking their whole point of being. You get that, right? And I can see your side too. You want to see the beauty of the culture of Adventism, the churches, the education system, the hospitals, the nice people, the haystacks, the happy Sabbaths. There's a beautiful culture there that is wanting to be closer to the gospel message while remaining Adventist. I see that as well. And that's an honourable endeavour. I guess my point is, I hope that there's a penny dropping moment that you realise that they actually have a point, though. That they don't want you in the church for very good reason. You are not going to be able to work it out with them. People think that that's me bagging the church or attacking the church. No, that's just literally saying they have a valid reason for not wanting you guys sharing your theology. They don't want it revised. They have a valid reason. And isn't that unusual? Because you also have a valid reason for being as well. But I think that the revisionist thinks that will be a day somewhere where you guys are just going to agree to disagree or maybe even get along. But that day isn't coming. And so what do you do with that? Well, I think embrace your Desmond Ford inspired theology. Embrace it. Be bold and proud of it. But don't try and invalidate the traditional Adventist, the original Adventist. Don't try and invalidate their claims against you. I believe they have real grounds for being upset with you. And so instead of saying, hey, you're trashing the church, or why not enter into a discussion on the things that are being raised? Let's come and reason together. Kes D writes, again, back to the 2011 post. He didn't remove anyone. The SDA General Conference and the Australian leadership removed Ford. Despite agreeing in principle with what he said, hard to imagine what all the fuss was about now. It was a big deal back then. These responses, and I know both the last two people I've mentioned really well, and this is 13 years ago. And I hope people aren't saying now, what was all the fuss about? I hope we can go, boy, there was good reason for this fuss. There was good reason for it to be talked about, not suppressed. There's good reason today to talk about it. There's good reason, because it it deals with the very core of Adventism and what it means to be an Adventist. And the church leadership did not even agree in principle, but Kez is right. At Glacier View, the majority of the people there voted in support in general principle of Des's findings. But as I said, after Glacier View, no, nothing to see here. They fostered this. What's the big fuss about, Then the rumours started, and then even Bill Johnson, who was there, and he and two others, and he probably mainly wrote the consensus document, the two parts. Nothing to do with the 10-pointer. We're talking about the main consensus document that people voted on. Even he, in 1984, said, look, the people gathered at Glacier View did not see light in the teachings of Des Ford. Believe me, there is something to see here, and it wasn't, and it isn't a big fuss about nothing. Alina Hutton wrote, I hear that the location of where he was put on trial and kicked out was of a very high altitude. At that time, my grandmother, very devout SDA, was of the opinion that the thin air affected their judgment. I hope what we've revealed is that it actually didn't affect their judgment. It was when they came back down that they started rewriting history. The Adventist leaders rewrote history. Look up some of what Gillian Ford has written about that, and how literally the things that were said when it was put in writing later, literally a rewriting of history occurred. And Alina adds, this is a good one, you can usually identify a pioneer by the number of arrows in their back. Wow, I wonder if Alina's still watching these days. And then begins, I'm gone down about 5 comments. Then it takes off this people now starting to argue with each other. And I remember back then, 13 years ago, going, whoa, this is amazing. There is a lot of passion and angst still there on this topic of nothing to see here. Boy, it started going off. Here's one by Andrew Taylor. He did preach righteousness by faith, but my understanding is he had his credentials stripped for what he questioned about Adventism's justification of 1844, i.e. the investigative judgment or the two-compartment ministry of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. Personally, I don't think they should have taken his credentials in the first place. For a church that doesn't have a creed, we have a pathological obsession with orthodoxy. On the flip side, I would completely understand if he no longer wanted to be recognised an ordained minister of the SDA Church. I'm not sure that the current GC president would be impressed if the offer was made, though, to reinstate his credentials at the time. That was the question at the time. I do think that what happened at Glacier View was a massive turning point for the church. But I also think we took a wrong turn. Well said, Andrew. I hope you're watching today. My litmus test on this matter is, does investigative judgment and a two-compartment ministry of Christ make sense outside the context of the Great Disappointment? And so here I started to notice some really interesting comments being made. And I was still fully a Seventh-day Adventist at the writing of this. This is 13 years ago. Lowell Tarling wrote, the SDA Corporation was horrible to Des Ford. their behavior showed us what bleeps they were. And then he points out that happily, he and his wife, we quit. Tim Bertrand writes, his version of righteousness by faith was very different to the true version as preached by Jones and Wagner and endorsed by Ellen White as the latter rain. It was far more than just the judgment doctrine. It was the whole theological package. Ross Todd, who is sadly now passed away, he was my teacher back in the day when I was at high school here in Kurrambong. And he wrote, and it's interesting reading his voice echoing from the past now that he's no longer here. I lived in Kurrambong during this sorry saga. Sadly, what I remember the most was the divisiveness, destruction, and intolerance masquerading under the banner of organized religion. I'll read one more. I'll read just two more quick ones, and I might try and share the link in the comments to the actual post. You might like to go and read it for yourself. I'll see if I can actually do that. I'm not 100% sure, but I will give it a go in a minute. So Eric Johnson wrote, hi Eric, if you're watching, great musician. Eric and his wife they play beautiful music. I don't want to comment too much on this whole issue. And by the way, there were a lot of tentative comments because people knew that if they were commenting on my post, it was public. And so there was a lot of cautious replying as well. And honestly, the liberal, progressive, revisionist gospel Adventists, the gospelers, they valued what I did at the time and were very supportive. And I think, thank you. And I think that's why a lot of the liberal progressives have been a bit upset with me lately and feeling that I'm trashing and bagging the church. I really, if you go and read anything I've said here and anything in my videos, even 4 years ago, I've been saying the same thing all along. I actually haven't changed. I was just as much bagging the church in 2020, 2022, asking some pretty hard questions in season 2. What has changed that may be making the liberal progressive revisionists a bit upset with me is I'm calling them out a bit. And no one likes to be, I don't. So I get it. No one likes to go, hang on, what are you saying here? That's a bit, is that a bit head in the sand? Is that a bit hypocritical? Could you have done more? Could we have done more? Could I have done more? So I do get that. But I thank you for your amazing support that you gave me in season 2. And from 2011, when I became more intentionally focused on supporting Des Ford's right to be heard and not suppressed, and to uncover what really went on. I value so much that you guys really got behind me during that time, because I think you saw the importance of what was being revealed, what was being discussed, that this incredible human, Dr. Desmond Ford, was finally getting another wave of support, which has happened ever since 1980, not just me, but I did feel a very special bond and gratitude from you guys, the liberal, progressive, revisionist gospel Adventists, for your support of me during that time. And look, I take on the chin what you're saying now. I've said things like, Ted Wilson's a real Adventist, and some of you have been upset. I get that. And I thank you for telling me that you're upset. How great is that you feel comfortable enough in our friendship to tell me, for being honest with me and authentic with me. So thank you. And I think this year is going to be the year of um, a lot of restoration of my connection with a lot of the different groups of Adventism, as I think people more and more get the idea that I'm just interested in dialogue and giving people a platform to share their beliefs. And yeah, I'll push back, but my focus is the platform and all of us having a chat about a wide variety of content. So Eric said, I don't want to comment too much on this whole issue, but all I can say is that he had a very detrimental impact on the church as a whole, in which the waves are still being felt. Unfortunately, now people are so scared to disagree with people in higher authority in the church, or if they hold a position, that they don't speak up, thus allowing such people to infiltrate, in some cases, cause worse problems than Ford did. Here is the thing. It's hard for anyone to get fired anymore in the church. See, I would disagree with that now, 13 years later. No. I believe that this whole Ford thing affected even that, where his accountability, credibility, and general ethically and where is accountability, credibility, and general ethically and biblically correct leaders? Yes, there are some, but we need more. It's interesting because he's kind of backhanding Ford, but going along with the realization that the leadership are the ones really to blame here, but not quite being aware of that. Again, because people were not talking about it. About 14 years ago, 13 years ago, around this time, I was running a kind of a bit of a gathering with a bunch of young Adventists. And I said, we're just going to go around, it was about 20, 15, 20 there. I said, we're just going to go around the circle and tell me what the investigative judgment is. And none of them knew. So social media can ensure that that kind of ignorance doesn't happen anymore. Let's have the conversation. Let's talk about this. Nerily wrote back to what Eric had said and said, did he have a detrimental impact, or was he made a scapegoat? Who is to blame then? Thank you, Nerily. Always incredible. Lowell Tarling wrote, he was the best thing you guys ever had. Nerily writes, exactly. So why has Ford somehow become a symbol of evil? I take my hat off to the man. He has never, ever been bitter about how he was treated or spoken negatively about the church. The same can't be said about Adventists who have treated him like a leper. And then, wow, they go on and on and on. Over 250 comments and then sub-comments under those as well, and replies. And that is in a bit of a nutshell, and there's people writing on all the comments now. Wow, I didn't realize how many. It's incredible. I'll come to that now. I want to just kind of look at some of the comments that you guys have been making, and look, I Happy New Year, everybody. I want this year to be a year where we increase our dialogue in civil ways, robust ways. I don't mind some divergent, robust conversations. I think it's great. I think we need to toughen up a bit, some of us. I think some of us need to get off our high horses. And I think, look, maybe I've used the word head in the sand a few times to a few people lately. Maybe I should say blinders. Maybe I shouldn't say something at all. What are your thoughts? I appreciate the comments. And look, some of these I didn't realize how many there would be. It's great on a New Year's Day. But let's have a look at some of them now. A lot of Happy New Year's. Thank you, everybody. That's good. Missy Mish writes, Happy New Year. Thank you so much, Pete, for all the work you put into producing your shows. I've been extremely blessed, more than words can express. Thank you. It's good hearing that kind of feedback. Thank you very much. And Moto Sapien, good to have you watch your Moto Sapien. I'd love to have you back on the show, and I won't drill down. I want to hear what it is you believe. I find myself in an interesting position because I completely agree with Peter that Des was wronged and a whitewashed after. That being said, I completely disagree with Des' thought theology. Yeah, and I think that's fantastic that you've said that. Fantastic. I said either before my interview or in my interview with Ellen Ford, Des's daughter, I said, I don't believe everything Des said, and I'm not pushing his theology. And she was surprised. And I said, I'm pushing his right to have to be heard, and I'm highlighting how significant the difference is in his theology as opposed to the traditional theology. And I am trying to publicly investigate the actual wrong that occurred to him and what it was. And so I appreciate what you're saying there, Moto Sapien, because I don't think it's a problem wherever you land with your theology, Moto Sapien, whether you agree with Des or not. But you and I do agree that Des was wronged. And I hope that the third thing that comes to light from our conversations, not just with you, Moto Sapien, but with everyone, is how very different the theologies are within Adventism. And sure, you might have a lot of different kinds, but there is a very distinct, unique Adventist theology that claims things I've said already, that a lot of the other theologies actually undermine. And so I'm trying to bring to the fore this idea, and I can't even seem to get this idea across to the traditional Adventists. They keep shooting arrows back at me when I'm saying, I think your claims are valid, that this new theology, in whatever form it takes, whether it's Maxwell theology, whether it's Ford theology, any of this kind of newer theology, this revisionist theology that comes into the Adventist Church, undermines what they are saying is the original version of Adventism and the very reason it came into being. I'm trying to really define that there are these two very, and on one side, all the different new theologies or versions that see the Adventist gospel in a different way. If they had all diminished the authority of Ellen G. White, they take away from the actual original Adventist message. And these guys have a right, a valid right, and a valid reason to be not wanting any of this new theology to come in and undermine their prophet. Moto Sapien adds new, but was blending of traditional Protestant positions with it. Yeah. And look, you just look at Questions on Doctrine, 1957. This was a watering down of Adventism that the original Adventists did not want to see come into the church. And John Caleb points out, well, what does the Bible teach? And that this is the interesting dichotomy. All the new theology guys that are seeking, what does the Bible say? Awesome. But any kind of new theology that undermines Ellen White's authority is going to get the backup of the original traditional Adventists who believe their message is unique and biblical. I don't think it's biblical, but they think it's unique and biblical, and it has a very unique, distinctive message. And the irony is that when you do start infusing the Bible into it more and more, it breaks down. But that's not my point. My point is the way they see Adventism and the reason for Adventism coming into being, whether it's accurate or not, doesn't matter. The way they see it, you more liberal theologians are potentially going to destroy their church. That's why they don't want you there. So I don't agree with their theology, but I agree that they have a valid point to make. Does that make sense? Can someone help me articulate that better? Because I have banged on about that for a few years now. And I must be the worst at articulating simple messages. I think Gillian told me that his first PhD was on rhetoric. Gillian, if you're watching, send me, please, a copy of that. I could do with learning how to be better at articulating my ideas. Thanks for being patient with me, everyone. By the way, there's two programs today. I've got one later this evening, 7 a.m. UK time, 6 p.m. Aussie time. You'll be all sound asleep in the USA. But I'm interviewing a guy called Jerome Knight, and he has a very interesting story to tell about his journey through and from Adventism. And it was the only time I could organize him to do the talk. So that's a special one for anyone in the UK and Europe. You can watch it live and be awake, not watch it later. And tomorrow I've got my very potentially controversial and interesting discussion with, I just want to double check it. Yes, it is tomorrow, with Brendan Paul Valiant, about a very much loved and respected pastor from Ma'i who took his life 2 years ago. It's going to be a bit of a interesting topic. That's tomorrow at the usual times. So I'm just going to bring a few more up and then bid ye all farewell for today. Go and do a few things and then I'll be back, as I said. So it's nearly 2 my time. So back in 4 hours from when we finish today. So if you're still up there, US of A, if you're still awake, come and join me. Fred says, what Des Ford said would happen to the SDA Church is happening today with Conrad Vine and Ron Kelly. And yeah, very true. And the tremors going through the church. That's why when people say there's nothing to see here and what's all the fuss about, they're not really. It is rude of me to say that their head is in the sand, isn't it? And a lot of people were saying it 13 years ago, but people are saying it to this day. And the reality is that the church leadership, the way it treated Des, And the way it's treated Conrad Vine, we're not talking about whether you agree or support these guys' ideas, but if the church keeps trying to shut down the dialogue, this is what happens. And therefore, there is a need for the grassroots people and leaders to speak up. And Rochelle writes, and Rochelle, by the way, thank you. I got those incredible messages you sent me. I want to talk about it so much. And now that the Christmas New Year period has gone, I will be writing to you very soon. I really appreciate your messages. You have just had some very interesting things going on that I'd love to talk about. Yeah. And thank you for saying supporting women. I think I see myself as supporting. I'm an anti-suppressionist, and I think men are in that basket as well. Where's Mize? Well, that's a funny name. Where's Mize? I like that. Has there ever been a period when there weren't shenanigans going on at the leadership level of the SDA Church? Well said. And I would say there has never been a time. But hey, this is the Lord's special church to share a special message of getting ready to the last generation of people. Get ready. And how do these people, how is this remnant group of people supposed to demonstrate how to get ready? With their own actions? And the opposite seems to be happening. I think every commandment in the book almost was broken with the way Des Ford was treated. And Rochelle adds, she's adding, it's hot here. I can hear Darren, my neighbour, hammering next door. Also, hi everybody. Just wanted to send hugs to anyone who finds the holidays kind of hard due to grief, etc. Yeah, very true. You know, it's not always an easy, good time, is it? There's some good conversations going on. I'm not going to comment on the many good comments that are happening over in Facebook, because that's a place we can dialogue later. These comments here coming in from YouTube are a bit harder to track down afterwards. Yeah, boy, this is very true, Fred. The SDA leadership will not be able to shake off what's taking place right now, as they did with Des Ford. See, that's kind of the point of what we're saying today. Social media has changed everything. They were super successful from 1980 to 2008. Super successful in being able to control the release of facts. This whole Conrad Vine thing, who I've invited on the show several times, and he has said a couple of times he's going to come on the show, just haven't been able to organize it yet. What happens next with social media not being able to shut down the voice of Conrad Vine? Yeah, wow. Interesting times ahead. David says it's all coming apart, as they like to say. It's the shaking. An honest person true to conscience will not stay. And yet people still say, nothing to see here. What's all the fuss about? And in 2011, when I had my original post there, I think you had a valid point if you said there's nothing to see here, because as far as what you were told, there wasn't anything to see. Adventist leadership are fantastic with propaganda, but no more. No more. Dale writes, "Hi, Peter from Bakersfield. Have you got your CDs yet?" I'm asking. And Say Hey says, Des had a rock-solid view of Hebrews 9. He wasn't a Bible illiterate. Only fools disagree with Des. I tell you what, when I've said, oh, I don't agree with everything Des said theologically, I'm speaking with a very broad brush. If I was an intelligent scholar, I'm pretty sure I'd go, yep, that all makes sense to me. But because I am not smart enough to grasp the nuances, and look, you don't have to be that smart to grasp them either. I think Des Ford's scholarship was spot on. I'm not criticizing his theology in the way that I'm saying, oh, I don't agree with Des's theology, all of it. I'm probably meaning more where he kind of landed on some things where he was more able to knit together his love of Ellen with the Adventist church and still would have happily remained an Adventist. So really, when I say, oh, I didn't agree with everything Des Ford said, that's really not my point. My point is I just didn't land where he landed as far as commitment to the SDA church goes. But I'm pretty sure theologically it'd be pretty hard to dispute a lot of what he said. But I'm also open for people smarter than I to be able to actually get into deep discussions in that regard. If the Des stuff wasn't in the back of my head as a teenager, I don't think I would have ever got out 40 years later. Wow. Des Ford has helped countless people through the years and will continue to do so. Thank you, Fred. Your work, Pete, has helped keep Des Ford's work alive and kicking. Thank you. That's a good way to look at it. I just want to keep Des Ford's work alive and kicking. That's it. That you've said that in a nutshell. Well said. Thank you. And Jimmy James writes, Happy New Year. Good to see you, James. Andy Mack writes, the more I learn about Adventism, the more I realize how insane I had to be to believe any of it. Excuse me. The whole thing is full of errors. I tell you, my personal experience after being raised in a Baptist community, SDAs do not act like Christians when you get to know them. That's sad, isn't it? Trail Rider, how are you, Marie? Des Ford has been a blessing in my studies. I've appreciated so much that he shared. I can't imagine why they've demonized him. I have a lot of old letters from Southern Adventist Uni, from Des. Oh, wow. See, there's another reason to have you on the show. The disciples of Ellen White have but one goal: to get you to join them on Saturday and bow at the feet of Ellen White. It's unbelievable. I guess when I laugh at things like that, that's what people say is me bagging the church. Barry writes, we had good ministers where I lived who supported Des here in Canberra. They are liberals, meaning they're not following scripture but tradition. Des was demonized because he threatened the authority of Pope Ellen. By the way, this week's gospel message, let me just check. I often throw these things out there and get them wrong. Yes, Hal Southwell this week. Hal, if you're watching, looking forward to this week's gospel message. And I think Nancy and Mark Claiborne the week after. Might have to check that as well. Yeah, Nancy and Mark Claiborne next week. Peter, don't stop. There are thousands upon thousands that need people like you to lead them out of darkness. Oh, wow. I don't even see myself in any way as a leader, but hopefully my love of asking why and just looking at stuff and talking about it, hopefully that just for all of us gives us a little bit of light on our path. Ian Baskin writes, if I'm correct, Desford started his internship as a Burnside team member. I also believe he never heard him preach on God's love. He was not comfortable. Yeah, I've heard that too. Gillian might be able to confirm that. Yeah. Trail Rider says Adventism has an image to uphold. Yeah. I mentioned earlier that I think there's a beautiful Adventist culture. I think there's elements of Adventism, and friends I know who do live in an interesting bubble of Adventism that has some beautiful cultural elements. But I'm happy to let everyone have their say, and whether I'm right or wrong, say hey says there is no beautiful Adventist culture. Adventists are mongrel dogs barking at the church. And I think sometimes people think that by me letting people have a say that might be negative, that I'm somehow endorsing that. And I can see that. I remember having a really conservative fundamentalist Adventist guy on the program, a lay preacher, and a very smart Adventist pastor wrote to me and said, "Oh, okay, so now you're becoming a fundamentalist Adventist. You've left the church, but you're going back, and you're taking on board." And I'm like, "No, he was just on the show. I like him. I might have sounded like I agreed with his right to be heard and that he had a valid reason to be upset with the gospel Adventists. But just because I have people on my platform doesn't mean I agree with them." You're always in a state of confusion if you try to stay in the Adventist movement and believe in the finished work of Christ at the cross. Yeah. Yes. That's an important point. I'm going to be putting on a program soon where I have really dug deep into this atonement stuff. And if you're a liberal, progressive, revisionist gospel Adventist that feels like you can bring in this understanding that you have, because I know most of you will agree with this one, that the atonement was finished at the cross. I know that most of you, liberal, progressive, revisionist gospel Adventists, will say the atonement was finished at the cross. The Adventist position, the original reason for being traditional Adventist position, is that the work was not finished at the cross. Isn't it an interesting conundrum I find myself in? If you are a traditional Adventist, believing Ellen White is a prophet, believing that the atonement work wasn't finished, believing in this special new judgment, believing that people are being raised up to show to all the other angels and other planets that God is to be vindicated, and Satan's claim that you can't keep the commandments is wrong. If you are that kind of original Adventist, here's my conundrum. I don't agree with that. I agree more with the people saying the atonement was at the cross. But the conundrum is that I don't agree with it, but I agree that your claim is that that is the reason Adventism became a movement. I agree with your claim that these other guys are interfering with that. I wish I could articulate that better, because it's hard to be supportive. It's hard for people to understand how I can be supportive of a movement I don't agree with theologically. And I wish that the progressive, liberal, revisionist gospel Adventists, I wish they could make a change and revise that. I wish they could. But I don't think they can. And that's what leads my comments of, oh, you've got your head in the sand. I try and make them playful, but obviously I upset people. So it's a hard one, isn't it? How do you say, you guys are awesome, but your head's in the sand thinking you can revise that, and go, boy, you guys don't even know what you're talking about theologically, my humble opinion. But hey, you guys have truly nailed that, you know what your message is, and these guys are getting in your hair. How can I nail that better and explain that better? Help me out, everybody. And say, hey, ads, just to kind of prove my point of I love everyone having a say. Only a fool stays in a disgusting, blasphemous, heretical, demonic cult claiming they are evangelists, foolish and disgustingly coward. Say, hey, come on the program. I would love to have you on the program. Not to support your attacks on the church, but to support your right to have a voice and to say the things you say. Right. Oh, and Andy Mack writes, yeah, my 6 o'clock will be your 9. That's correct, I think, Andy Mack in Western Australia. Adventist analyzer. Yes, Peter, just like me, those rigid SDAs were sold an Adventism that doesn't look like today's Adventism. And to many Adventists, the gospel Adventism, they're not aware of some of the... There's many local churches here that are very supportive of a gospel approach, a biblical approach, and I would say many don't even realize what the roots of their church were saying. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? A lot of the liberal, progressive, revisionist gospel Adventists love the Sabbath and see it as an important ingredient to Adventism, as I think did Des. But I don't think they think it's a salvific, that there's salvific, is that a word? Reasons to keep the Sabbath. But Ellen White has it with a halo around it. So she's highlighting it as, boy, this is, you got to keep it just right or you're not going to get to heaven. And Mimi West writes, the Liberals don't like Vine either. They think he is a kook. I tend to think that the SDA Church is a cluster of different groups of kookiness. Kookiness. Oh, thank you, Mimi. And again, I'm laughing, but that doesn't mean I'm supporting or endorsing what Mimi just said. I'm not attacking the church because I laughed at her attacking the church. Oh, that was so funny, Mimi. Very, very well said. Oh, I hope you don't mind me bringing this onto the screen, Mimi. This is a time of grief for me. I lost my husband of 47 years, the end of December of last year. So this has been my first year of getting through the holidays without him. So sorry to hear that. And all of us here at SDAQ&A send you much love and warmth, and I hope we can be here for you in some small way. Dale writes, no, my CDs haven't arrived yet. They must be coming by boat instead of by airplane. They did give me an option of sending it fast freight, and I said, oh no, normal freight's fine. So maybe, sorry about that. And Cindy Lou has snuck in, and she adds, the 28 Fundamentals is a creed by any other name. Barb T writes, I was just a baby in 1980. I can't tell you, growing up, Desmond Ford was brought up frequently. Many arguments. It was a hostile environment as a child. So sad, isn't it? See, this is the thing. Like I read earlier that Lowell Towling said this was the greatest man you ever had. And I just imagine sometimes, what would Adventism have been like if Des had been embraced, and this I would have loved the new theology to permeate even more and take over the church and leadership to accept it. Imagine what kind of a movement it could have been if it hadn't lost hundreds and hundreds of ministers in the early 80s because of this line in the sand. The church definitely had some kind of schism or split at that time. And I just think the creative people lost. Imagine, I love the dream that the revisionist Adventists have. I love that dream of imagining what it could have been, and they're thinking what it could be, and I think that's such a beautiful thought, because what an incredible human, a very unique and special individual Dr. Desmond Ford was. Absolutely incredible. And imagine if he'd been accepted and embraced and welcomed and featured. The church would have changed, I think, for the better. But the reality is, it can, in my humble opinion, it can never be revised, because at its core, its original reason for being, you can't breathe that beautiful message of assurance and righteousness by faith fully into the Adventist church, that beautiful Des Ford message. You can't breathe it into the church without undermining Ellen White's authority. If you do away with 1844, the investigative judgment, which Des did, and he showed that it was unbiblical, if you do away with that, you have to ask yourself, Who endorsed that teaching? Why did she endorse it? Ellen White endorsed it, and she endorsed it because God told her it was accurate. How can you revise that? You can't. I'm sorry. And that's what gets me into hot water. Because I'm saying to the revisionist, oh, yes, I wish you and me had been able to get behind the forward message. I wish the church had accepted it. I wish they hadn't defrocked him. I wish he hadn't been demonized. I wished hundreds of incredibly creative pastors didn't leave. I wish this beautiful message that I thought was possible, I wish it had taken hold and obliterated all the other nonsense. I wish it had. But at the same time, I've given up. That's one of the main reasons I left. Women's ordination and the realization that the core DNA of Adventism cannot be changed. Cannot be changed. So you're then left with revising your area, your local church. Great. Awesome. Do it. Have a ball. But big picture, collectively, at least let's acknowledge that the war is over. And I don't mean that to be offensive. And I might be wrong. Prove me wrong. Revisionist Adventists, liberal, progressive, gospel Adventists, prove me wrong. Please. I would love that. But yeah, just imagine what Adventism could have looked like if Dr. Desmond Ford and Gillian Ford were embraced on the inside of the church, not loved afar. I want to give a little plug to Good News Unlimited. Go and check out their website. I think it is goodnewsunlimited.org. Maybe someone can tell me. Go and check out their incredible work. Oh no, it is a .com. goodnewsunlimited.com. Go and check them out. If you want to really enjoy this kind of Adventist gospel, in many ways you can find it over there at Good News Unlimited. So, I'm keen to keep supporting what you guys, could have been, and hope that you can still be. John Rosie is going to do a program with me. He wrote way back then a big article called something, what Adventism could have been. And he's going to do a program with me on that. So I'm not supporting that anymore. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I support your right to hope it does. And show me when it does, let me know. And Motor Sapiens added, yeah, I don't agree with that view of atonement either. I don't fit into any of your boxes. I know you don't. That's why I love you being on the program. I love chatting with you. And I think part of my drilling down in the questioning of you in the last show wasn't because I was trying to trip you up or disagree with you. It was because I don't get where you're coming from, because you don't fit into any of the boxes. I'm trying to find out. That's why I want you back to share what it is you believe, and I'll sit back and listen. Next week? 2 weeks after? Well, I think next week we've got Miles Christian on and David R. Larson. Maybe the week after. So 2 weeks' time. Let me know, Motor Sapien. Andy Mack has written, "You are right, Peter. Adventism is what it is. Get out instead of revise, but you want to hold on to your haystacks and the Sabbath, etc." I still love haystacks. People say, "Oh, it's just nachos with a bit of salad." Nah, there's something about the way an Adventist haystack is built, put together, structured, special vegetarian sauce with nut meat. Oh, something great about it. Okay, I am going to wrap it up. Oh, I've gone 20 minutes longer. Kevin Brown, I'm surprised to hear you read out so many comments with savage ad hominem attacks on those they disagree with. Yeah, I yeah I hear what you're saying, Kevin. I don't like ad hominem attacks, so why am I letting ad hominem attacks be presented? Yeah. Maybe by doing so, I reveal also the effectiveness or lack thereof of doing so. I've had a lot of ad hominem attacks on me recently, and I'm not just defending myself, but I'm just observing that, yeah, I would rather hear people refute claims instead of attacking the person. How are you, Kevin? Is it Kevin Brown that I know? I'd love you on the show, Kevin. I'm sure we could have a really interesting discussion. I also think that sometimes I don't think the ad hominem attacks I've put up were against people. I think they were against a kind of an anger for how the church has treated them and others. So I don't think an ad hominem attack is counted as being so if it's a release of anger towards an institution. I think it's when it's aimed at a person and the claims aren't discussed. That's where it becomes a real issue, I think. Okay, so look, I'm having to bypass a lot of the comments there. And I'm going to wrap it up, everybody. But thank you very much for being involved with today's conversation. You'll need to go back to find out why I called it intentionally defending Dr. Ford since 2011. But essentially, I wrote a post. Let's see if I can just quickly, before I go, share that link. Oh, where's it all gone? Yeah, let's see if I can, because some of you might like to go back and have a look at that. Look, this may not work, but I think, let's try it. Rochelle says, I love how we can't get through a single episode without someone mentioning haystacks. That's the common ground. Haystacks. Look, if someone's watching on YouTube, I've just put the link there. See if you can click that. And if you're watching on Facebook, let's see if that link works there that I've just posted. That will take you to the actual post and comments. Oh, I shouldn't have done that because I realized that will make that post go to the top of my... Don't comment on it, just read it. Otherwise, it's going to bounce to the top of my personal page. I just realized, and everyone will think I've just posted it. And I can't delete it now that I've put it there. Ah. So please read it, but don't comment or like it. And Andy says, thank you, everyone. So grateful for each and every one of you. I think, let's try and support each other. And thank you, Kevin, for pointing out that maybe I'm adding fuel to the fire by putting people's comments there. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. This is a good one. We'll finish on this. A church needs a left wing and a right wing. With just one wing, it will just go in circles. Wow, that's good. Thank you, Fred. And it's true. So yeah, and I wrote that post that I just shouldn't have shared. 2011, and I became aware that the power of social media couldn't shut down people's voices anymore. And while I had known Des as a little boy at Avondale, he and Dad were lecturers at Avondale. And while I heard him speak through the 80s, while I got to meet him, while in the 80s I reflected on how the church leadership would shut down your conservatives, George Burnside and your Des Fords, and I really resented that. Something happened in 2011 that gave me the opportunity to defend Des Ford in a way that I hadn't been able to do before via social media. And I noticed on that post that I did and shared the link, and please read it, but don't comment on it. I realized that it was an important discussion that people needed, in my humble opinion, I thought needed to discuss. So everybody, it's my time coming up to 2:30. I will be back at 6 my time. So that's 3.5 hours. If you're still awake and want to join me as I interview Jerome Knight, it will be 7 a.m. his time over there in London. And he's an interesting guy. I think you'll enjoy that conversation. Tomorrow, I'm talking to Brendan Paul Valiant about Famai, the much-loved pastor who took his own life. Friday, Hal Southwell will be sharing our gospel message. Next week, we have Miles Christian, then David R. Larson, and Nancy and Mark Claiborne sharing the gospel message. It's going to be a wonderful couple of weeks, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to catching up with you guys a lot more again in 2025. See you later.